Good evening. We are so pleased to welcome you to the Frontier of Cancer at Frontier Night, an evening where we offer you an exclusive look at the science and people behind Illumination. I'm Susan Hell, Vice President and Executive Director of the Foundation for Barnes-Jewish Hospital. Each year we host Frontier Night to showcase the groundbreaking research conducted at Siteman Cancer Center, which is funded through donations made through our annual Illumination Gala and the Cancer Frontier Fund. This is our first ever virtual Frontier Night, so thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to interacting with you later during the live question and answer portion of the evening. Someone recently asked me, and maybe you've wondered, why we call this evening Frontier Night. Well, we refer to it as Frontier Night for a couple of reasons. First, the Foundation has a special fund called the Cancer Frontier Fund that was established by Bill and Amy Komen to accelerate cancer research so new treatments can move more quickly from the laboratory to the patient bedside. Another reason we call this evening Frontier Night is because our pioneering physician researchers are truly blazing trails on the vast cancer frontier that you will hear about this evening. While much has been discovered about cancer, we still have so much to learn. And that's why our Siteman physician researchers relentlessly develop and pursue the most promising paths through this frontier. And their spirit of inquiry is paying off with new discoveries in understanding, prevention, and cures for cancers. Tonight, you will hear from 5 physician scientists on the impact philanthropy has on their leading-edge research to improve the ways we prevent, treat, and cure the many, many forms of cancer. This research saves lives by speeding breakthroughs into better treatments for cancer. We will also create a full circle view of how the dollars you donate go through a rigorous process to support the incredible work in their labs, and how that affects patient care, treatments, and clinical trials, which in turn impact our loved ones and our entire community. Last year, donors to Illumination raised over $3.5 million. Which means even more life-saving research projects will be possible at Siteman. This year's Illumination Gala will take place June 5, when we will celebrate you, our donors, and the transformative impact you make with every single dollar. We hope you will join us. Visit illuminationgala.org for more details. And now, I'm going to turn the program over to Dr. John Lynch, President of Barnes-Jewish Hospital, who is on site at Frontier Night and will introduce us to our impressive panel. Thank you again for joining us tonight. John?
Thank you, Susan. Wow, the innovation continues. This is our first hybrid night of this type of event where typically we're together. This year, of course, we haven't been able to be together, but tonight we have some hope, right? Some of us are here in person, and all of you, of course, are joining us through the miracle of virtual presentation. So the innovation will continue. You're going to hear some great stories tonight about the innovative research and the discoveries that are happening at Siteman right this very minute. So I am John Lynch. I'm the president of Barnes-Jewish Hospital. And at this point, it's my honor to introduce our moderator for this evening, Dr. Timothy Eberlein. Dr. Eberlein is the Siteman Cancer Center director. He also serves as the Department of Surgery's chairperson. So, Tim, it's through your compassion, collaboration, wisdom, and determination that you are leading us closer every day to a more hopeful world in cancer care. Tim?
John, thank you very, very much. This is a really exciting evening for all of us. I hope that by the end of the evening, you will see firsthand what it's like to think about a research project, how we develop that research project, how your contributions fund it, and how it makes a difference in patient care. So tonight, we're going to peek under the hood. We're going to look behind the curtain. We're going to find out how is it that we put together elite teams of researchers to be able to make an impact, to provide hope to patients, and to provide new discovery in new treatment options, and even prevention of cancer. So with that introduction, I'm going to introduce our first panelist this evening. Nancy Bartlett is a professor in the Department of Medicine, a really close friend of mine, and as I've come to appreciate over the last many years, is really the, and I put that in italics, the expert in lymphoma. What I've also learned from Nancy at her elbow over the last number of years is lymphoma is really a whole panoply of different diseases. And each of these diseases require different expertise to treat. So Nancy, tell us about how you put your elite team together and developed a spore application, etc.
Thanks so much, Tim, for inviting me tonight. It's really a privilege to be here and speaking to hopefully many of the people who helped us develop our lymphoma program at Siteman. And want to personally thank Ken Steinbach and Bill Coleman for sort of starting this many, many years ago in terms of seed funding to get our research started. And then they also helped us recruit many, many other donors and just so many people. And I really want to thank each and every person who's donated to our lymphoma research program through the foundation. And just to kind of tell you a little bit about our lymphoma program, that we're relatively small. We have a handful of physicians and scientists who have been working both in the clinic and in the laboratory. And our goal over the last few years since receiving this seed funding through the foundation has been to really explore multiple different sort of immunologic approaches to lymphoma, which is the way treatment is going for many cancers these days, including lymphoma. And the main reason we're looking at these immunologic approaches is they often tend to be less toxic, and they also have a completely different mechanism of action. So patients who haven't responded to standard treatments are, potentially have another avenue to explore. And we're lucky enough, as Tim said, to be a world-class cancer center. And so there are many experts scattered around. And what I would say that I've kind of learned over the last several years with having this seed funding is that while we're trying to bring other experts to WashU and sort of grow our lymphoma team, there are so many folks already here working in other areas of cancer, and there's so much overlap between all the cancers now that the seed funding has really allowed us to sort of buy some time and expertise from people who are working on other areas that do have relationships. The work they're doing is highly related to lymphoma as well. So just by example, Todd Feniger has really been our translational lymphoma scientist and is a world-renowned expert in something called NK cells, which are natural killer cells, which we all have and are part of our immune system that help us fight infection and cancer. And he and his lab are trying to reprogram NK cells to specifically work against lymphoma, and they're called CAR NK cells. And again, there's, I think, a few of these types of research with the NK cells going on across the country, but Todd is really one of the leading folks to be doing this. And then the Griffiths, Dr. Malachi and Obi Griffith, are in the Genome Center here, and they work on multiple cancers. And again, we were able to sort of buy some of their time with our seed funds, and they are helping us develop a personalized vaccine for patients with lymphoma that looks at, they actually sequence the patient's lymphomas and find all the mutations and then help us develop these vaccines that are directed against a patient's tumor mutations. And we've actually already started this trial, which was started through philanthropic funds as well. And we have 4 patients, and it's looking very exciting. And another part of that project is to develop a mouse model for lymphoma, which we've never had here at Siteman. And so Bob Schreiber is, again, a world-class immunologist, works on multiple types of cancer. Most of his work has been in sarcoma and lung cancers. And when we were able to show him the money, if you will, he is now developing a lymphoma mouse model for us, which has just been, and he's going to test our vaccine theories in the mice to try and move things along more quickly in terms of how we should be trying to prepare that for the patient. So it's just, it's been phenomenal. And another one of our new faculty that was just recently recruited, Nathan Singh, who was recruited from University of Pennsylvania to work in acute leukemia. When we talk to him, a lot of the work that he does in CAR T-cell therapy for acute leukemia has some, it also applies to lymphoma patients who are getting similar therapies. And so he's now working on CAR T-cells in lymphoma patients to try and find out what makes them tick in terms of why some of them don't work to get rid of the lymphoma and other ones do work. And hopefully they'll be able to identify new targets. So again, those are just a few examples of what we're doing in lymphoma that have been spurred really entirely by the seed funding. And because we were able to do that, we're actually applying or have applied for what's called a SPORE, which Tim mentioned, which is a specialized program of research excellence. And there's just a few of these for each type of tumor across the country. And you have to have multiple experts in an area, so you have to have a lot of people working on one type of tumor and several projects ongoing to even apply for this. So the seed funding has allowed us to apply for the SPORE, and we're very hopeful. We actually applied in September and did not have a score that allowed us to be funded, but that's very typical with the first SPORE, and I think all of our projects have gone very well. So next time around this September, we'll have more preliminary data, which is always helpful in terms of trying to gain SPORE funding. So again, just extremely thankful for all the money that we've been given to try and work on these projects.
So you begin to see, with careful investment, the Cancer Frontier Fund was originally envisioned as a venture capital fund. That is, investigators, people like Nancy, come to us with ideas, bold ideas, new innovative ideas. And we vet those ideas, and then with an application, review that in peer review, and then award the money. And it's that investment that has paid off to the tune of over $225 million of grants over the last number of years that we've been investing in this program. Another investment that has recently been made is our next panelist. Dr. Ryan Fields is a professor of surgery in the Department of Surgery. He's one of our co-program leaders for the solid tumor program at Siteman Cancer Center. I think he'll talk to you about, again, putting these elite teams together from multiple diverse backgrounds, but more importantly, the impact that tissue provides and how we can perform tissue banks and do very sophisticated genomic and other kinds of analysis on those tumor specimens in order to gain insight into new treatments for patients with cancer. Ryan.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here, and I echo a lot of what Dr. Bartlett had talked about. And one theme I'd really like to hit on is that this is a world-class institution with incredible facilities, but it's really the people here and the combinations of those people working on projects that makes this place so special and unique. As a surgeon, I kind of like to think of myself more of an enabler than anything else, and enabling us to do incredible work with the tissues that we can control and provide in the operating room in a very rigorous and scientific way is something I've been very passionate about. And as I'll give a few examples, that's really led to a lot of unique collaborations that have been very unique to what we can do here within the buildings and institutions here. Some time ago, about 10 years ago, I met, as I came back from fellowship to join the faculty, I met Tim Lay, one of our world-class researchers in leukemia and lymphoma and genomics. And he introduced me to Chris Mayer, who's one of the associate directors now at the Genome Institute. And we were very interested in trying to really understand in the world of solid tumors why some tumors spread or metastasized and others didn't. And we wanted to leverage the ability that I had in the operating room to study some of these tumors that had become metastatic and then compare them back to the primary tumors from which they metastasized. So an example would be a patient who had a colon cancer that had spread to the liver, where we had the unique ability to study, with the generosity of patients and their consent on clinical protocols, to compare their original primary tumors to their metastatic tumors. And over the course of years, and with the support of the Foundation and the Frontier Fund through some of their team science initiatives, we're able to do just that. And where that's come now is we've identified several novel targets that we're now developing therapeutics that are unique to metastatic colorectal cancer. And this may open up a new area not only for treatment, but also for diagnosis, where we can use a test of a particular phenotype, a particular molecule that's expressed in more aggressive tumors than non-aggressive tumors, which can help us guide more precise or personalized therapies. That wouldn't have been possible without the vision of the Frontier Fund and that seed money that really got this off the ground. Because as we alluded to, the Frontier Fund really is its venture capital. The federal government likes to sort of be on the back end of it more when there's some proof of principle, and it's that proof of principle that needs some seed funding and support, and that's just what the foundation does. The second thing I'd like to talk about is the idea of cancer modeling, and that's something we've been passionate about as well. We became very interested in the idea of trying to understand why some tumors respond to treatments and others don't. And although you can study that in patients, it's very hard to do that in a rigorous way that we could otherwise do in the laboratory in a more controlled setting. It's been very challenging to study immune therapies in the lab because you really need an immune system. So we developed a project in collaboration with several investigators here in the Department of Immunology, Bob Schreiber and others, and developed a mouse model that's sort of an avatar, if you will, of a human, where we take a human tumor, we take a subset of that human's immune system and introduce them into a very special mouse that's been manipulated so that it can then grow a human immune system with a human tumor. And then in that controlled setting, we're able to evaluate different immune therapies and vaccine strategies in a way that then can hopefully benefit patients. And we've taken that from a concept to proof of principle to now testing it in multiple tumor types, including melanoma, colon cancer, and pancreas cancer. The third thing I'd like to talk about is really an indirect effect of the Frontier Fund. And it's not so much the money that it provides, but really the connections that it's provided. And it actually piggybacks very nicely onto something Dr. Bartlett mentioned, and that's the work that Todd Fenninger's done with natural killer cells in a liquid tumor, if you will, or in lymphoma. And through a number of ways that Todd and I have sort of crossed paths, and I don't remember if it was his idea, my idea, but it doesn't really matter at this point. But we said, well, if this works in lymphoma, maybe we can see a similar signal in melanoma and some other cancers. And we just have a paper under review where we've shown just that in melanoma. This looks like a very, very promising therapy in melanoma. And we hope that's the tip of the iceberg in solid tumors. And that's something nobody else is doing anywhere in the world, number one. But number two, I don't think would have been possible here without the Frontier Fund's indirect effect of bringing people together, where these team science approaches really take what would have been small successes or individual successes and make them really potentially revolutionary changes that lead to new therapies, that lead to improved outcomes, with not only better outcomes in terms of cancer treatments, but also reducing the toxicity and morbidity and effects of cancer therapies. So really, I think big picture, the Cancer Frontier Fund allows people to think big. It allows us to get ideas off the ground, and it brings people together in a way that makes our cancer center truly exceptional.
I think a lot of people ask, what is it that makes Siteman Cancer Center so special, so unique? And I think one of the things that is really a really unique aspect to our cancer center is something that Nancy talked about and Ryan has talked about, and that is we bring people together. And it doesn't matter whether you're studying leukemia or whether you're studying colon cancer. We can learn from each other. And at our institution, at Washington University, at Barnes Jewish Hospital, that happens better than any place else on earth. And another example is my next guest. Dr. Catherine Few is professor in obstetrics and gynecology. She is focused on endometrial and ovarian cancers, women's cancers. We've had a wonderful clinical program over years, and as in the last couple of years, again, we've assimilated a beautiful team to put together, in this case, from multiple institutions from around the country in order to create a specialized program in oncologic research excellence in endometrial cancer. So, Catherine.
Thank you so much for the introduction. It's been just thrilling being here and trying to figure out how can we improve treatments for our women with endometrial and ovarian cancer. And one story I'd like to share is this concept of bench to bedside and how it's happening right here all the time. And in fact, everyone who's spoken before, they've had that same experience. And from our laboratory, we've been able to actually inform, like the data that we have from our laboratory has been able to transform into a phase 1 clinical trial open here at Washington University as well as other cancer centers. And the data from this phase 1 trial has then now become a phase 3 trial that not only is available for women nationally, but also internationally. And we are the leaders here that really helped inform and made that possible. And with the help of philanthropy, our laboratory and our group has also been able to work on identifying new targets and new signals, not only ovarian cancer, but also uterine cancer. And take the innovative model that Dr. Fields has been speaking about, instead of plating tumor cells on plastic, which is probably the easier approach to do, been able to actually culture cells from our patients who, again, have given us the consent to be able to do that. And so the tumor cells are actually interacting with environment cells. The same cells that they actually see in the human body, they're actually able to also encounter in the laboratory. And that has allowed us to really identify and ask, what are these unique signals? So we're always one step ahead of the cancer itself, in that, sometimes the tumor cells are so many different ones, just like, humans, we're all not the same. And so we're really trying to stay 1 step, 2, 3 steps ahead of our tumor cells. And so the philanthropy has really made this possible because, these are what someone might call exploratory, or the NIH likes to really fund, as Dr. Fields mentioned, more projects that already have been established. And so these types of projects really need to have this philanthropy that we've been so grateful to have received. And now with it, we're able to assemble a team for our SPORE funding. I think you've heard that SPORE concept a couple times here, and that's where we can really make a difference, bringing together everyone who has different expertise all across the university, all working together to identify new ways to affect our women so that they can actually have better options, and we're establishing it right here. And I probably want to end with one story of my own patient who was on the phase 1 clinical trial with ovarian cancer. And she was just so grateful that the trial was possible because of the research that we did in the laboratory. And it gave her the 9 months that she needed with her children in high school, and the treatment that was discovered was such where she could actually water ski, throughout the summer while on treatment. And that really was so meaningful for her and able to really have direct effect on our community. Thanks.
Catherine, thank you very much. One of the other aspects of our treatment of cancer patients is not to just provide success in individual patients or populations, but how do we extend these great treatments, these new innovations, these new discoveries, and how do we metastasize them into communities around our catchment area, not just in the surrounding St. Louis area, but in North County, in the Boot Hill, where we have some of the highest rates of cancer mortality in the entire United States of America. Our next panelist guest is Dr. Bettina Drake. Dr. Drake is a professor here in the School of Medicine, and she is our Associate Director for Community Outreach and Engagement. And what she is an expert is how do we do outreach, education, screening, implementation science in populations and impact diverse populations in our community and region. Bettina.
Thank you, Tim. I'm so excited to be here tonight and to talk to you a little bit about our community outreach and engagement activities. And as many of the panelists have talked about today, the collaboration that happens within Siteman Cancer Center. And what we do with our community outreach and engagement efforts is we extend that collaboration beyond labs, beyond the clinic, and out into the community. The mission of our community outreach and engagement efforts is really to make sure that the cancer patients at Siteman and the community benefit from the clinical and scientific advances that we have right here at Siteman Cancer Center. Part of that work is that we work hand in hand with our community partners. We work with nonprofit organizations as well as several cancer survivors and community partners with our community advisory board, and we also have several cancer-specific community partnerships that really drive those cancer-specific efforts that we have throughout our communities, whether it be linking the mobile mammography van in order to increase mammography in areas that we've identified that have high rates of late-stage diagnosis, or promoting more education about colorectal cancer throughout our catchment, or even promoting smart prostate cancer screening and information to inform communities that are at high risk. Another component is that we are constantly monitoring the data. What is the cancer burden in our catchment? What patients are being diagnosed at late stage disease? And what are some of the risk factors that we can address so that we will know how to promote our intervention so that we can intervene both within the right populations and with the right materials. We have working with investigators such as Dr. Graham Kolditz, who has really developed a evidence-based cancer prevention and control platform that we like to call 8 Ways to Prevent Cancer. And we've adapted that to our communities to provide cancer prevention education materials, both for all of our major cancers as well as for young adults. We've tailored it specifically to rural populations, urban populations, Native American populations. And so that's another way where we're making sure that we are addressing cancer prevention and control in our areas. Another key component for our efforts is to support the research that you've heard the other investigators are doing, and making sure that they hear the community's voices so that the research that they're doing can also impact the communities throughout our catchment. And a lot of that work, we rely on grants both from the National Cancer Institute, but also from foundations and from nonprofit organizations that really allow us to be able to immediately address the needs of our community members and to assist and provide screening resources and other types of services that aren't typically allowed through federal funds. I want to close with just one example that it really drives home the impact of the collaborative effort that we have. So about 10 years ago, in doing the same work that I just described through our outreach and engagement efforts and monitoring our cancer burden, we identified that there were a couple of zip codes throughout the North City and North County area that had high rates of late-stage breast cancer diagnosis among African American women. So we worked with our breast cancer community partnership, we worked with our clinicians, our researchers, all of our community partners through churches to promote education on screening. We worked with our mobile mammography van to increase screening events, specifically within those counties. We shared information about the importance of screening, worked with local community groups so that they could talk to women, and they had developed a buddy program to go with women to get their mammograms. And through collaborative efforts over time, we were able to see a 40.5% reduction in the percent of African American women that were diagnosed at late stage disease. And it's not something that happens overnight, but it's an evidence of what can happen when all of us work together and we're working collaborative both within the labs and the clinics, but also reaching out to the community. Thank you.
Bettina, thank you very much. So I think you could begin to see this evening that Siteman Cancer Center is really everything from bench science, mouse models, to clinical trials in patients, and even intervention in whole populations of patients. That's what really makes us unique, is we want to be all things to all people. And we want to provide that hope that is going to be the sustaining salve for every patient who has a malignancy and comes to Siteman Cancer Center. And that wouldn't happen unless we had the partnership with each of you who provide support to Siteman Cancer Center that we can carefully invest in all of these projects and many, many more. So I want to encourage you to ask questions. I'm sure the brief presentations that we've all provided this evening actually will give you an opportunity to ask your question. And you can do that through the chat mechanism. And we'd love to hear any questions that you have for myself or any of our expert panelists. So with that, could we have the first question?
Thank you, Dr. Eberlein. Our first question of the evening is, I thought the NIH was funding more research these days. So why is philanthropy still so important?
So I'm going to start out because it's something that I'm really passionate about. Indeed, the National Institutes of Health and the National Cancer Institute have had an increase in funding. However, for years, the National Cancer Institute's pay line has been 8%. In other words, 92% of all the applications to the National Cancer Institute are turned down. So how can you become one of those 8%? The best way to do that is to have a bold idea, a great vision, but also a plan for execution. And that's what each of these investigative teams have done this evening, is they've put together this team in using the investment from the Frontier Fund, have created the preliminary data, the proof of concept, the feasibility that has made us one of the most successful cancer centers in the country. We actually have 91 of these collaborative, multi-investigator, multi-background grants in Siteman Cancer Center. I'd welcome any of our panelists to chime in. Nobody wants to chime in.
I'll chime in.
Please.
I would say exactly, that's an excellent question, and I think we touched upon it a little bit during our own talks about our research, but the idea that this philanthropy in the Cancer Frontier Fund, my own project that was funded that then resulted in R01 funding, I know other panelists have had the same experience, that project needed seed funding, needed philanthropy, because it was asking these bold questions, but the NIH wanted not just a bold question, but also kind of some answers that you already knew was going to happen. And so you need ability to actually perform some of these early experiments in order to then develop that grant, and that's exactly what we did. And it not only turns into an R1, but other grant mechanisms also that are also funding these same ideas, because this one Cancer Frontier Fund idea and project can really spur off so many other projects as well. So it's been such an rewarding experience.
Can we have another question?
Wonderful, thank you. And for the audience at home, please be sure to be entering your questions into the chat box. Our next question is, we hear the term personalized medicine a lot. What exactly does that mean?
Anybody want to take a stab at that? Nancy?
Sure, yeah, no. That's a great question, and it's not a straightforward answer. So there's many types of personalized medicine, and I think most of us these days think about looking at a specific patient's tumor and finding out what's unique about that tumor, and then trying to choose a treatment that would be most effective for that patient. And I think that's where that term sort of started in the first place. And Ryan is helping do this by getting all of these biopsy samples for us so we can send them to the Genome Center and have them sequenced and find unique mutations that then allow us to either, if there's already a drug developed that is targeting that mutation, use that mutation for that patient. Alternatively, when in the projects we're working on in lymphoma and as Ryan said, in melanoma, in colon cancer, in breast cancer, is trying to use those mutations to have a patient's own immune system fight that tumor, and that would be the target, would be the mutation in that patient's tumor, and those are called personalized vaccines. So it can mean many things, but I think those are probably the two things that most of us think of when you think about personalized medicine. And it's not easy to do personalized medicine. I think we all are very aware of this very large NIH-funded study called MATCH, where patients had tumor samples sent in to the NIH, and they did all this genome sequencing and trying to find mutations and then try and identify the therapy that targets that. And it's sometimes trying to find a needle in a haystack. So there were, tens of thousands of patients on that study, and the mutations that we find that are what we call targetable, meaning there is a drug that acts against that change in the patient's tumor, are very few and far between. So we are still struggling to find the right target that we have treatments for. And so as a clinician, I would say it's a little bit frustrating. Personalized medicine is frustrating, and in terms of having to look at 100 patients before you find one that has the target for which you have this new drug that's going to work. But I think the jury's still out on whether that's the way we're going to go, versus I think many of us trying to develop immunotherapies and other therapies that are sort of go across a broader range of cancers and more patients.
Ryan, you want to add?
Yeah, I'd echo all of that and say I think one of the most exciting areas is the idea of personalized or precision medicine within the idea of immune therapies and cancer vaccines in particular. What can we do and identify that's unique about one person's tumor that could turn into a vaccine? And my vaccine would be different if I had a particular type of cancer than somebody else who may have the same type of cancer on paper, a melanoma, but with different types of mutations. So we would literally construct a vaccine in real time. And again, you can imagine the logistics of this, of being able to do just that, and then combining a vaccine with an immune therapy to try to show a response. And I think here, we're just absolute world leaders in this because of the efforts of people like Bob Schreiber and Todd Fenninger and Will Glanders and others who are developing these for all sorts of different types of cancers, from leukemia and lymphoma to urologic cancers and renal cell cancer, pancreas cancer. So across the board, that's really an emphasis and a strength of Siteman Cancer Center. And in order to do that, you can write a beautiful grant that says, here's what we're going to do. But if you can back that up with, and we've done it in 5 patients with money from the Cancer Frontier Fund, and we've been supporting biospecimen science, so we have a bank of tumor specimens ready to go and study as soon as you fund the grant, that puts you in a much more competitive place to be in that 8%.
Do we have another question?
Thank you. The next question is, what is happening with vaccine therapy for breast cancer?
You need to take this one, don't
Yeah.
you, Tim?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do I have to do this one?
you have to take this one.
All right, so vaccine for breast cancer. Again, as both Nancy and Ryan have spoken previously, it's identifying the patient's own unique cancer. So we can look at a breast cancer specimen under a microscope, and we can have a breast cancer that looks identical from two different patients. However, the vaccine will only work in one of those patients. That is, the patient that we make the vaccine. This is very time consuming and it's a little bit cumbersome, but in the patients that we have studied so far, we've seen some dramatic responses in about 20% of the patients. In other patients, we see that their progression of disease is arrested. And all of a sudden, while the disease doesn't necessarily shrink, it'll quit growing. And so, again, as some of our panelists have mentioned, it sort of makes us go back to the laboratory and say, gee, what is it that we're missing? When we're creating these very personalized treatments, they have less toxicity, they have the opportunity for great response, but we're still not 100%. And if we're not 100%, that means that we're probably missing some nuance when we create this vaccine. So those studies are ongoing now. We're combining them with checkpoint inhibitors, that is immune therapies. And we're also studying these in different tumors. So again, we're comparing and contrasting response in pancreatic cancer or prostate cancer or lung cancer with how it works in breast cancer. We learn from each other.
Wonderful.
How about another question?
Yes, thank you. This one is specifically for Dr. Drake. How have you updated your activities at Siteman Cancer Center in response to COVID-19?
That's a great question, and it's something that we have done, and I think fairly successfully. Again, prior to 2020, the vast majority of our activities were out in the community. Almost every weekend of the year, we were at least one or two different events spreading information. And so when we were forced to be more virtual and to stay at home, we continued to work with our community partners, talk to them, send them information so that they could distribute to their community members, churches, so that they could share with their congregations. And so we've done a couple of things. One is we transitioned to doing virtual town halls. And so we worked with our community partners to get topics. Some of those early ones were really focused on COVID and cancer. We had a lot of cancer survivors who were interested in what impact could COVID potentially have on me as a cancer survivor, and how concerned should I be? When the vaccine became available, we were also doing additional town hall meetings, talking about what the vaccine is and who should be, what considerations you should be having when you're thinking about getting the vaccine, and if there are differences for people who were survivors or not. And really kind of taking the lead from our community members, still promoting breast cancer, prostate cancer, colorectal cancer education as well. Another activity that we conducted during the pandemic was working with our church partners. Some of the pastors talked about some of their members were less likely to go to the doctor in general. And what we know from national data is that a lot of screening appointments were being canceled or postponed during this time period where patients were just hesitant to go into the hospitals. And so we worked with several pastors within our St. Louis city and county area and developed a video that they could then share with their congregations on the importance of cancer screening. We highlighted them so it was in their words and their voice and their message. And we gave them opportunities and information on how they could schedule appointments, that Siteman was open and that we're still here.
Yeah, I must say, in many ways, the pandemic has sort of forced us to think outside the box. And we've created some other unique partnerships with the Urban League and other organizations across our community. And so while in some ways it's been more difficult to physically be out in the community, in other ways we've created much better partnerships and we're working more together as a team with our community. We should have another question.
Thank you, Dr. Drake and Dr. Eberlein. Our next question is, what's your advice to a patient who has just found out they have cancer?
Come to Siteman.
Yeah, come to Siteman. That's, you know, there are differences in cancer centers. And it can be important in certain patients. I think what you can hear from our panelists this evening, we have incredible expertise and it goes across the spectrum of cancer. So no matter what your unique problem, no matter what unique disease, there's an expert here. And I think that really helps us to make a difference. And I think the other thing that has been really important at Siteman is we're all committed to putting patients on clinical trials. And if you think about clinical trials and the impact that that has on patients, it shows the feasibility, the proof of concept, the proof that a new treatment, a targeted treatment, a breast cancer vaccine actually works. And there are very few places where you can have the investment to do these very innovative trials and the commitment to put patients on trials. I don't know, Catherine, Brian, others that want to chime in?
I think I would just highlight that if you have a new diagnosis of cancer, it would be very rare in 2021 for that cancer to be treated by one doctor in a short period of time. You're generally going to have a team, and the way I describe it to a lot of patients is it's kind of like being on a bus, and your bus is full of a lot of different doctors, and at any given time somebody's driving the bus. It may be me while you're undergoing surgery, and then a medical oncologist who may be treating you with therapy afterwards to reduce the cancer coming back, but I'm still on the bus. You still have this big team of doctors and other support staff, dietitians and nutritionists and all sorts of things related to education and understanding. And the Frontier Fund for sure and the foundation in particular have really supported these endeavors that are not inexpensive but make a huge difference. So for example, we know from experience that if you have a new diagnosis of cancer and you're sitting in that room, you're going to remember in about 10 to 15% about what we talk about on that first visit. And so how do we overcome that so that you really understand your diagnosis and have the ability to go back and explore what we talked about and think about things? Well, we've created various patient education portals, modules, videos, resources that are homegrown and made that are particular to cancer types that have been supported by the foundation and the Frontier Fund that have really driven and made an impact. And we've been able to measure this in everything as from patient satisfaction, but also to reducing complications because patients know what to expect and what's good and what's bad, what should trigger a call to the doctor or a trip to the emergency room to reduce, to take a complication that can then be small from turning into something catastrophic. So it's just, I think, a huge benefit of being at a place that has the resources and the expertise and the infrastructure and the people to treat every cancer in a team-based approach.
Any other questions?
Yes, we have just a few more. What are the most prevalent cancers today? And how does it vary by geography, age, and gender?
Do you want me to?
Please.
I can take that one. So definitely within Siteman Cancer Center's catchment area, the most prevalent cancers are breast, prostate, colon, lung, and pancreatic cancer, if I were to give you a top 5. And we do see one example of a region within our catchment area. I didn't talk about Siteman's catchment area earlier, but it's an 82 county area that spans parts of both Missouri and Illinois. It goes all the way down to southern Illinois, as well as probably as far west as Columbia and the whole southern part of Missouri, including the Boot Heel. There is a cluster of counties throughout the U.S. that are a part of a colorectal cancer hotspot. And our catchment area has about a third of those counties within its catchment. And many of those counties are in the southern parts of the Boot Heel of Missouri and southern Illinois. And we have a number of efforts going on, both community outreach, working with clinical partners, as well as research projects that are multi-level, working with patients as well as providers and systems to both promote colorectal cancer screening, to provide reminders for patients, to implement system-level strategies for providers and clinics to provide that as a service, specifically within those areas in order to address that colorectal cancer hotspot. And what that hotspot is an area where the rate of colorectal cancer mortality is significantly higher than what we see in the nation as a whole.
How about women's cancers and, ovarian cancer and endometrial cancer, et cetera?
Right, so even though ovarian cancer is the 11th most leading cause of cancers in women, it's the 5th leading cause of death, and endometrial cancer is the 4th most common cancer in women. So we here at Siteman and our partners, we do see so many of these women who come from so many of the different areas in our region to come and ask for treatment options and are with us. So as a G1 oncologist, we do see these women at the time of diagnosis, surgery, as well as the chemotherapy, and for some end-of-life care. And this has really triggered many of us to really build up the research part of it so we can really turn these conversations into survivors instead of something else that we would wish to change. And so I would say those are what we see here commonly.
Can we have another question?
We do. One last question. Did the pandemic set back any cancer research?
I
Nancy.
can start, and the answer for us is yes. I think that was probably true for most people who are working in labs and as well as our clinical research, because at least March, April, May, that many of the labs were shut down, and I think a lot of the folks in our lymphoma labs were working on remote data, but not being actually able to go in and perform the experiments. So I think things did slow down, and in the clinic, as we've already talked about, there was a lot of hesitation about people coming into the office, and so our new patients dropped dramatically for 2 or 3 months, and those are, a lot of the patients that are coming for clinical trials, and patients were frightened about that, I think, before we knew that we could stay safe at the hospital and with some fairly simple measures. So I think things were slowed down, at least for us, I'd say maybe 3 months, but interestingly, by summer, June and July, we had our highest accruing months that we've had in like 2 or 3 years. So it came back quickly, I think, once people realized that with appropriate measures, they could come to the hospital and be safe.
Other comments?
Yeah, I'd also just give a little vignette that, yes, things slowed down and shut down for a while on the research side in a very safe way, but as Dr. Eberlein alluded to, there were some silver linings in the pandemic, one of which is, as many people know and probably had shots in the arm of the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine that were based on these new mRNA vaccines that had never been used before. Right before the pandemic hit, we were talking about launching an mRNA-based vaccine trial in melanoma, and there was a lot of skepticism, does this work? It's never been tested. Well, that trial opened a couple months ago, and I don't think it would have in that speed and time if it weren't for the success that this has shown in the COVID vaccines and this technology, and I think it's going to become a very adaptable technology to cancer vaccine as well as infectious disease vaccine strategy because of how quickly it can be changed, adapted, and cost effective. And so it's exciting to see some of these successes translate across different disease types and try to find some unique things that have come out of the pandemic that we'll certainly learn and hopefully benefit from.
Well, this has been a wonderful evening. I first want to thank my panelists, my colleagues who every day I get to work with. Thank you very, very much. It was really a pleasure. But I also want to thank all of you in the audience, because without that partnership, we would never be where we are today. So on behalf of all of the patients that we care for, thank you very much. And John, you're up next.
Thank you, Tim. And thank you to the audience, for those of you who sent those great questions in. It was a really good dialogue. And also thank you to the entire panel. Thank you for your stories of innovation and treatment and research. Thank you for your efforts to provide equitable cancer care for all our populations. And thanks for those wonderful stories of collaboration across the campus and quite honestly across the world. Something that's a unique feature of the Siteman Cancer Center and really puts us at the frontier of cancer care right here in our own community. So just a couple of housekeeping items for the audience at home. Please continue to utilize the chat function. Someone from Susan's wonderful team will follow up with your questions or comments. And remember that the Illumination event, again virtual this year, hopefully for the very last time, will be June 5th. And please visit illuminationgala.org for more information. And remember, there's a gap between traditional funding that is sort of the gold standard of doing research that is closed by the Cancer Frontier Fund and through those donations made by you all. So please consider giving a gift again and consider the great